Hey everyone, I'm Nick and welcome back to the channel. If you've been watching for a while, you'll remember this supercharged Mercedes C-Class that I bought for only $600. Getting it back on the road wasn't too bad, and if you want to see everything we had to do, check out the series right here. Since then, it's been really fun and efficient rear-wheel drive manual car, and it hasn't really needed much. Now, you may be wondering why it's back in the garage, and that's because it almost caught on fire. While he was out driving it, Rob noticed an awful smell like an electrical fire, and the car suddenly started smoking. The car also threw an intermittent alternator error, and the blower motor was making really weird noises. He shut the car off, checked the engine bay, which smelled odd, let everything cool off, and removed the blower motor fuse. Since there was no sign of an active fire and it largely smelled electrical, he got back in the car and nursed it back home. Thankfully, it made it just fine. We swapped the blower motor and resistor with a good one we had sitting around, and the smell in the cabin got better, but when standing outside the car and letting it idle, it still smells like hot electronics, and the pulleys sound different, and when you drive the car, it seems less responsive. We think that the sound and the alternator errors mean that the bearing in the alternator has thrown in the towel, so we're going to replace that, and while we're in there, we'll take care of the idler, the tensioner, and throw in a new power steering pump too. So let's get to it. Alright, so before we get started, first thing we have to take off is this intake pipe. And to do that, we can start here. We've got a little catch. Just turn it 90 degrees. It'll pop off. Then we need to remove these clips. And then there's two more in here. And for these, I'm going to use a screwdriver just to push the tabs down. There. And then we can pop the bottom one out, which just slides straight up and down. So right here, just push on here lightly. That'll release them from here. And the bottom slot there is just a tab right there. It pulls up and out. Removing the front of the intake pipe is a little tougher because the catches are harder to reach. It's a little hard to see, but there's a little catch there in the slot right here. And what I did was, through this opening here, brought the screwdriver in to push down on that catch. And on the bottom, it's actually pretty similar. Move this out of the way. You can reach in a little bit. There's the catch there. So what I did is I reached in inside and kind of pulled this a tiny bit up and pulled the hose down or outwards on the bottom. But it is pretty tough to get out. You can see here the teeth, the hook in around the intake and the two slots. Those little teeth hook right here and right there. Right now, we're going to remove the silencer here, which is part of the supercharger system. So it goes from the supercharger output to the silencer, down into the intercooler, which then goes back out into the intake, but we're going to remove that. So there's this hose right here we have to undo. There's a little clamp right there. Well, there's another clamp back here. And then we've got one right here. Now, this clamp right here has a metal clip type retainer, which we'll have to slide out. And there's two E10 bolts on the top and bottom around this hose. Okay, mine is a 7. Wow, that's stuck on there, huh? I don't want to damage the hose, so a little nerve-wracking. Here we go. That's good. That's off. We're gonna get the two bolts, which you can see the standoffs here and down there. And up here, we've got the clamp right there. I guess we'll loosen the side that goes to the supercharger. And right here, this is the hose clip. think that'll pop out, so I'm gonna try to do that right now. That's off. A little bit of oil in there. Okay. I'll loosen the other side. Now we just need our E10s here. I got another one of these below. Yeah, you can see it right here. They're a lot easier to see from the bottom. Now, I think we pull the bottom away and slide the other end off the supercharger. And maybe we can tilt it back up and out here. No, maybe not. Okay, let's leave it down there for now. Next, we're gonna take the belt off, but there's something I want to point out that I noticed already before we even take it off is this idler here. You can hear it's a little loose, so that's probably rattling. That means the bearing's probably worn out, but we're gonna replace it. The tensioner is right there, and to release the tension on the belt, we gotta come down here. You can see right there, there's a little Torx bit opening that we can put in a T60. There we go, like that. Then we can put in our tool, release the tension, and pull the belt off. So this hose, this coolant hose is in the way. You don't have to take it off, but you want to be careful around it. You're gonna need a short extension. Okay, we'll get that off. So I ended up using a little extension just to clear the pulleys. Let's get this belt off. This goes over power steering pump, around the alternator, back over the water pump, over the tensioner, over the crank pulley, and then AC compressor, supercharger pulley, and then under the idler. This belt's in decent shape. The rubber's a little tired, but not bad. No crazy cracking, certainly starting to wear. Let's take a look here. That's definitely loose. Yeah, tensioner too, a little bit. That feels good. It's getting replaced. Gotta unplug the battery next, but. Ooh, let me get my microphone in there. Sounds like it needs help. Well, that's good too, because that's the current suspect for the hot smell we got is the alternator. So actually, while I'm here, just so I don't forget, let's get to the battery. There's this cover here. Now this one's actually missing one of the latches, but it's better than nothing at all, because when we actually got the car, this was completely missing. And that means that water coming through the hood vent will just drip onto the battery. With this in place, it'll actually drip around the battery. And this also holds the air filter, cabin air filter. So it's good to have. Now the battery will disconnect. Got our ground there, our positive there. I'll take care of that in just a moment. Now the idler, that doesn't sound very good. And the tensioner is kind of the same. So the bolt that holds on the idler is an E12. It's not on super tight, so should just be about 20 Newton meters. So get that going. All right, now you can see got this like washer here. Got a little O-ring. Got another washer up front and the bolt. I want to take this apart because our replacement is just the bearing and the pulley. And the bearing looks pretty tired. Now these may be a slightly different style, but they are exactly the same size, so it will be fine. Put that over it. Get a little O-ring off. Put that on. So you know what, before I do that, I'm gonna clean all this off so it'll look nice. Put our O-ring back on. Get this back in. That will go to 20 Newton meters. Nice and quiet. Now, the tensioner, you can replace the whole tensioner, but the proper procedure involves removing the airbox, the manifold, and the supercharger to get to the bolt that mounts it that's behind. You can also try to reach in, sneak it in, sneak a tool in and undo it, but you can also just replace the pulley. So we're gonna replace the pulley. It is a security torque, so it has a little punch out in the middle, so there's a little pin, and it's a T50. So I'm gonna get that on and break it free. Okay. It wants to turn, obviously, so maybe I can counter hold it with the tension release. Let's pop that on here. Got it. It's our old pulley, our old bolt. I'm gonna get the new one. Now I actually have the whole tensioner assembly, but since it takes so much to actually get back there to replace it, I'll be just taking the pulley, and eventually when I pull the supercharger out to service it, I'll pop the good pulley off, put the new tensioner in, and we'll be good to go. It's not strictly necessary. I mean, unless something catastrophically fails, the tensioner is going to hold tension on the belt with the old one, but when we have the opportunity, we'll put a fresh one in. Let me put a tiny touch of blue Loctite on it. I'm also going to put that to 20 Newton meters, put a little bit of blue Loctite. Bolt size is similar to this. The idler I use is a Dayco 89006. And you can get, for the tensioner, you can get just the pulley, but if you want to get the whole thing, you can get the Dayco 89612, though I really recommend just getting the pulley itself. And that is the tensioner and idler pulleys, which means we can turn our attention to a power steering pump. So before we take this pump off, let's do a quick walk around of what's connected to it. So we got a couple main connections. We have a return line right here, which connects right in there. We have our high pressure line right here. Then we have one bolt up top and 2 bolts down below. Now this bolt, you might think, oh, how am I gonna get my tool in here? Well, luckily, there is an opening through here. So we'll be able to slide our tool in from the side. And then down at the bottom, we'll just have to work down here and feel for the bolts, which are stuck in there. But we can take a look on the new pump. You can see our new pump assembly comes with everything. It's got the reservoir mounted. There's our opening for the bolt hole. We've got our return line capped off. We got our high pressure line capped off. On the bottom, it's 2 holes right there. Now before we do anything, we want to drain this tank as much as possible so that we don't make a huge mess. Now you may have noticed right here, there's a line. And I believe that is the connector that runs down to the alternator. So we're gonna have to unclip it from the heat shield. Do a little screwdriver. Here we go. Fish that through if we can. See what's going on there. Oh yeah, there's another clip in there, right there. So we'll have to get that off. So maybe it's worth pulling this whole heat shield off first. So we can remove the heat shield. It's held on by 4 T20 screws. One here, one here, one here, and one down there. So make sure your exhaust is cold so that you can work in here safely. You can see down there, there's the other clip. You may have to pull that off once the pump's out. All right, so we're gonna drain this, pop this out. Fluid looks fine. We wanna drain as much as we can before we take this off. And to do that, I'm gonna use a Mighty Vac. I've used a syringe before, and I just remembered I had this. And that's gonna catch our fluid in here. The reservoir is probably bigger than this. I'll probably have to do it twice, but let's just drop our hose in there. Whew, doesn't smell great, but no, we're almost there. Now, one thing I like about this setup is that your whole pump doesn't actually get contaminated by anything. You just have the hoses to clean and the little container. So it's pretty nice. When you do it with a syringe, you gotta clean the syringe, clean the gaskets and all that. And it's a little more involved to clean. So good thing to keep in mind. This is a Mighty Vac, M-I-T-Y-V-A-C. You can also bleed brakes with it. Lots of uses. Now, I'm gonna clamp off this hose right here, because the rest has like a heat shield on it, and then we'll undo the clamp on it. So that's on. And this should be good. Back here we have a little Oetiker clamp. I'm gonna pry that off. Towel just in case. We'll pull that off. Okay. Okay. Whoops. Get the plug out of from the old one, or for the new one, plug that up. Get a little better. There's our clamp. I'm gonna plug this if I can. Little finger off a glove. And then I'll get a rubber band. That'll do. So I kept that off because it wasn't quite empty. And we got some fluid on the hose there. We'll wipe that off a bit. Now our high pressure line is actually bolted to this little bracket here, which is bolted to the alternator. I'm gonna break it free first. So I have a 17mm crow's foot. Now it's gonna go on below, slide it up, get our tool on. Just don't forget that you're working from the top. So if you go this way, we'll be loosening. So set to tighten since we're working from above. Ooh, this is tight. Let's see. Normally you should be able to loosen this with a line wrench. I don't know if someone's been here before or something, but this is only the beginning of my struggles with this line. All right, so before I continue, I'm actually gonna loosen the two bolts, or remove the two bolts on the alternator that hold this bracket in, because if that hose, this hard line here, is being held in place, it may make it harder for this to come down. So we're gonna reach in down here. We have a little bolt right there. Probably a little hard to see there. Right there. And then down below, right in there. So probably go from the bottom for that. Get those two out. And since we're taking the alternator out anyway, it will be progress towards that. I think it's E12. So I was able to get the two alternator bolts that hold that bracket in, like that. I was able to move that out of the way. And to do that for the top one, I had to tighten this back up to where it was, and that gives us just enough clearance to get a tool in and get to the bolt. A little tedious, not a ton of space. The bottom one was super easy because just access it from the bottom. Now, let's try again and undo this. It shouldn't bind up against the bracket anymore. It turns out the issue isn't the line being held up by the bracket, but the nut holding the line that's seized to the line. So removing the bracket only allows the hard line to rotate with the threads, which is not very helpful. So the line and the threaded piece are not separating, so I'm going to heat this piece and hopefully it will help it come free so it can actually unscrew it properly without the whole line twisting. I'll be using a butane torch for finer control, like kitchen supplies type, and let's give it a try. Should we spray it with PV Blaster?
Yep. Pull it down with PV Blaster.
No, still in one piece. Probably should have tried this more times and maybe with a bigger torch, but this was a learning experience. So I let this sit overnight and I had sprayed a bunch of penetrating fluids in here to hopefully separate the hard line from the threads, and that didn't work. So fortunately I do have another solution, and that is to disconnect this line at the other end. So this high pressure power steering line is a hard line that connects to the power steering pump. Then it goes to a soft line that wraps down there and goes to the top of the steering rack. Now disconnecting it at the steering rack means that we can remove the pump, pull everything out, and then we can, unscrew this, work on getting this separated so we can actually install it again on the new pump and putting it back in place. So let's take care of that. Actually both power steering lines connect at the top of the steering rack down there, and they're actually held on with one bolt and a plate, and that locks them on to the power steering rack into their ports. So I'm gonna get under there and show you what's going on. So right here at the steering rack, you can see the lines coming over, and right there where the socket's on, it's an E12. There's a little plate that holds both of the lines in. You can see it right there. It's a little tight. I'm gonna figure out what I can do. I'm gonna break that free. It shouldn't be too tight. The torque spec is 18 Newton meters. We got the bolt out. To reach in, use a wobble socket, kind of get it broken free, and then unscrew it by hand. Now I'm trying to get this out. It's this line here. Turns out it's also bolted here, so I'm gonna have to undo this. But I'm trying to free that line. I'll work on getting that out. So I got the line free and it's dripping out now. I'm gonna undo the clamp that holds it in, and that is that one right there. It's that torque screw. So I'm gonna get that done. And then our should be able to wiggle our line out of our steering area and pull it out of the way. So that's a T30 down there. We only have one to undo. Alright, so with the line free down there, what I'm going to do is unbolt the power steering pump, and then we can lift it out, pull the whole line out, and deal with that. Well, then we'll deal with the alternator, and we'll deal with that. So right, let's get our extensions in here. These are still E12s. And then there's two lines underneath, or there are two bolts underneath. One's right by the pulley, and one's a little further in. Probably gonna drop down once I get the threads out. Okay. And now we can lift it out, I think. Pull the hose with us, probably might spill a bit, but what do you catch it on? Come on. with the power steering pump out, I'm gonna remove the heat shield here. So there's a little clip there that I'm gonna take out, so you can use it on the new one. I guess technically you could just reuse this heat shield, put the power steering pump in and screw it on, but we have a brand new one, so might as well. Back here, you can see there's a bolt right there and a connector right there. So the bolt there is our battery positive, and our connector down there goes to this wire. We have the connector right there. Definitely easier to remove it from here. And then our last bolt, oops, right there. So I'm gonna get that connector off. Okay, that's disconnected. The connector here has a little push tab. You pull it out. And another bolt out. So we're gonna have to drop this down once this bolt's out so we can get to the battery positive terminal, and then we'll just lift it out. Support it. Bolt out. Rotate it so we can get to that nut. Gonna rotate it down. We're gonna get that out. It's a 13. Grab it. Turn it back up. Lift. Oops. Lift. Lift. And out. And here is our brand new Bosch alternator. Looks very nice. Nice and shiny. And actually, terrible. Now the new alternator, we get a warning for telling us to make sure our battery is nice and charged so they don't damage the alternator, but we're good on that. Now, just have to put this in. So the connector goes at the bottom, battery positive is there. We actually have a new nut on it, which is good. Yeah, I'm gonna bring it down, connect the battery positive. Oops. Bring that down, straight down. Rest there. Our battery positive. Okay, that goes to 15 Newton meters. Okay. All right, let's get the one underneath done. Connector here. There we go, it's clipped in. I just have to tighten that up. Now here to fit your torque wrench, because there's all this stuff in the way, you can actually bring it back here and over. So what I'm gonna do is use this extension, fish it up. Should be long enough. Not quite. Need another extension. 20 Newton meters again. Pretty light, that's good. Now there are two more, but we'll probably put those in once we figure out the line situation, since the bracket will go on there, on those two bolts. But it is mounted in place. All right, so our pump is out. Now we can work on getting this off. I guess I'm just gonna hand turn it and it'll be all right. Just turn the line. Wow, what's going on? It kind of looks like someone serviced this and kinked the line, maybe. And that's why it can't slide off. because it's at an angle from the threads. I don't know. So I've been using my propane torch, heating this up, spraying it with PV Blaster, letting it cool down, and we have rotation. Still a little tight, so I'm gonna go a little more, but I won't be able to turn this consistently, so it's better. It's almost good, actually. Do one more pass, loosen it up a bit. Yeah. I took the O-ring off before I did anything because I didn't want it to melt. Wow, positively smooth. I wonder if someone over-torqued it, if they serviced it before. And we're gonna let that cool down, and then we'll try to put it back in. We'll see if it's still good when it's cool. So we're back. It's cooled off. It's still loose, which is great. We'll be able to put it back in more easily. So I'm going to put the line back in. And if you're wondering, why didn't you just heat this in place? Well, I probably should have. But, you know, you do what you're comfortable with and be safe. Next time, if I had to redo it, I would probably do it in place. Just be sure to have the fire extinguisher handy, that kind of stuff. Put a new O-ring on it, because the original one was extremely flattened into a cone. This should be good. I ended up using a P007. It's not exactly the right one, but it should work just fine. Our other O-rings here, they're stacked. There's two. They're in good shape, so I'm gonna leave them. You can see right there, that's the plate. Our high pressure line will get hooked in there with that square piece right here. So I have to reposition it, which I did not do right. That line is gonna loop under here and over. Normally you wouldn't even have to consider doing this because your line and bolt shouldn't be seized together. And this is kind of a extreme situation, so we'll make it work. We're fixing it. Oh, there we go. Yes. Okay. Okay. Now, whew, didn't go as bad as I thought. You can see there, the plate, it stays on the return line. High pressure lines to fit in, then we can slide the plate on and then align it in. There's like a square guide on each one, and this side kind of hooks over. And now we have to torque this to 18 Newton meters. 18 Newton meters. Oh, it was through here. Come on, I believe. Yes. Yeah. Still in place. So the tip, get your tools in, is use a little extension to the bolt, and then slide your wrench through here. And you don't have to unbolt anything. Now before I fill everything up, I will clean all this so I can see if there is a leak, but there shouldn't be. Now I'm going to reattach the little hose clamp there from the top, and we'll keep going. I'm going to put the hose clamp back into place at the bottom, 230. Again, this is only if you took the line out, so you can skip ahead if you didn't. The snug, perfect. Now since our situation with this has been resolved, I think I'm going to put the bracket on the alternator back on that has the little threads to hold the hard line. Now before we go to put this in, I want to point out that this one is a E10. When I went to try to remove this, there was like rubber from the clamp that was in the way of the bolt. And for E10, you can actually use an 8mm wrench to grab onto it to loosen it. Always be careful, you don't want to strip the E-Torx, but it will work. And that's how I got it off. Get this started. So it'll make it a lot easier to torque the alternator bolts to spec if the power steering pump's not on. Okay, let's get this clamp on. This top one tightened down, 20 Newton meters. All right, let's get the bottom one. It's in, it's steady. This is still loose, so we can move it. Our new power steering pump. Let's see what we can do. Let's route this in. All right, I'm gonna take this heat shield off so I can run the battery cable behind it properly. Now let's get the top one in prepared here. Actually, let me make sure I can get this cap out. I want to use a screwdriver, break it free so we can go by hand. Now let's drop it in. All right, let's get the other ones in. Okay, they're all started. Now I just have to tighten them up. Now these also go to 20 Newton meters, so we're gonna keep that in mind. There we go, that's torqued in. So let's get the cap out here. There might be a little bit of lubricating fluid in the pump. Yep. There was. And there still is. Get that, put it on the O-ring. Okay, that's not ideal. All right, so it turns out the bracket that holds the hard line is not letting me move that into place. So let me get that out. Here I'm struggling to get the hard line into place, which shouldn't have been an issue, but like I said, it was gonna cause me problems. So for the line, I actually had some difficulty getting it lined up. So what I did is I unbolted the power steering pump, got this started by hand, got it pretty snug, and then put this back into place, bolted it back in. And now I'm gonna torque this to, well, the torque spec is 40 Newton meters, and we have to account for the crow's foot. So using an equation, a calculator I have found online, I'll leave a link in the description. We essentially have to recalculate what the torque spec will be because we are torquing something that will be 1 inch further than normal. So the 40 Newton meters ends up being 37.14 for my wrench, which is 13 inches long from the center of the handle to the center right here. So I'm going to torque that to spec. Now you want to be really careful when you're torquing this because you do not want to bump into the pulley and chip it, so we'll keep that in mind. Now if when you're able to slide this on, it ends up too close to, like kind of in a spot where it doesn't work, you can flip this and it goes back on in a slightly different position. Now here I was tightening it a little more to get it ready for the torque wrench, and the hard line started to turn again. Why is it doing this again? Come on. Okay, so I got the hard line nut tightened up. What ended up happening is it bound a bit. I was trying to tighten it, and what I needed to do was back it off and then hold the line in place while I tightened it back up with my stubby 17. And that got it nice and snug. And now we can torque it to spec. So like I said, this is, you have to account for the crow's foot. Anything vertical height changes nothing. So let's see, put that in. Probably gotta make sure I am in the right setting, which is reversed because it threads in from the bottom, but we're working from the top. There we go. Put that out. All right, that is torqued to spec. Our pump is in place, our hard line's in place. Now we can put that line back there in. I'm gonna get a Jubilee clip. All right, let's get this off here. Put that on. And that's snug right there. With that connected, we can undo this clamp, take it out of the way. There we go. Now we just have to put our heat shield back on back here. I guess I could take the bottom clip off. So I'm gonna do that. That'll run in there. Protected from the exhaust. Snap this down. There we go. And now we can get these started. And once we have two aligned, it should be easier to get the others. Turns out this one has some messed up threads, so I'm gonna replace it with one of the old ones. There we go. Wow, I think that's everything. No, not really, because we have to put the belt back on, but pretty good, pretty good. All right, now before we put the belt on, I just want to point out the alternator we put in is a Bosch AL 0810N. And the power steering pump is a Bosch UK S010000565. So this one has a core, so we're gonna be shipping the core back, getting, I don't know, like $100-something back. So yeah, don't forget to return your cores. Even if it costs to ship, you're still gonna get money back. So I got my little diagram I made and the pictures I took for the routing. I'm gonna get that started. This is a Dayco 5070955, or yep. Goes under the alternator, over the power steering pump. Power steering pump, alternator, water pump, tensioner, crank pulley, AC, supercharger, and under the idler, which is nice and steady. Now we can get this silencer back on. Just wiped a tiny bit of silicone lubricant on that hose so it was hard to remove. I'll pull the tape I put on here. Oh, now we can start aligning it. So let's see. Get this up here. I get that on first. That's on. I guess we could slide this on. Get it started anyway. All right, that's aligned but not in. I'm going to get the bolts for that in first. I'm gonna do the bottom one first. That's in, you gotta snap that down. That locks it in. This in. Let's see. It's not going anywhere. Get a longer one for this. And so those bolts for the silencer to the timing case are 14 Newton meters. All right, let's get the bottom one. That is everything. All right, next we will fill and bleed. All right, so it's time to refill the power steering system. And to do that, we are using CHF11S. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna fill to, they say, about 1 centimeter below the fill level. And then we're gonna start turning the wheels left and right, lock to lock, all while adding this until no more bubbles show up through the system. We don't wanna start the car before we've done that because it might send air through the system and it gets really difficult to take it out. And yeah, so first step is to fill. Yeah, this is also pretty expensive, so try not to spill it. All right, go ahead. Whoop, slow down. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. So we want to go until there's no more bubbles in there. It could be up to 30 times per the manual. You're gonna watch this and check if there's any leaks. Nothing there. Okay, yeah, don't go too fast. It's like bubbling up. I also checked for leaks around the steering rack and everything was dry. Now because I removed the line, there's a lot more air in the system and that's why it's bubbling up so much. Oh, okay. What? It bubbled up pretty high there. Okay. Oh God, okay, I got it. Keep going, I got it. I topped up the reservoir and the fluid level is staying steady when we turn the wheel. At this point, I can't hear air in the system anymore and only tiny bubbles like this are coming through, so we can move on to the next step, which is to run the engine. We're in a good place, moving it manually. So now it's time to turn the car on. We're gonna idle it for a minute and then we're gonna go again until no more bubbles show up. And we gotta make sure the level stays good. So I've got my fluid nearby. So yeah, I'll put a timer on and we'll get it started. All right. Okay. After turning the wheel back and forth a few times, the power steering feels good and consistent, so we're all set. Yeah, so we're gonna let this cool down to 20 Celsius, which is what, 68? Well, we're gonna let it cool down to ambient temperature. And then we'll check the level and we'll bring it down or bring it up, depending on how it is. But everything's working, no leaks. So we are good, that was a success. Now with everything bled and back together and tested, we can put our air hose back on. So we're gonna put this side in first. It should just snap in. It's a lot easier to put in than to take out. So. And then this side, we'll put the bottom in first. Slide that over. That's in. Now we just need a screwdriver. So got a little tab there. Put that on, turn it 90 degrees. There we go, that's in. Yeah, and then we just have to put the under tray back on, which is just 6 bolts. So it's all back together and working great. The scraping noises, errors, and the smell are all gone, which is great news. The power steering pump was a bit of a pain because of the seized line, but everything else went really smoothly. Now the car can go back into the driving rotation and we can have a little more fun with this 6-speed manual Mercedes Nugget. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like and check out this car's rebuild series if you haven't seen it yet. Now let me know in the comments if you've had to deal with stuck lines or bolts on your projects. If you have any other tricks besides heat, juice, juice, heat, juice, heat, let me know. If you want to see more of this car, don't worry, it'll be back on the channel in the future, so don't forget to subscribe to see it again. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.